Welcome to MMA on the Rocks. My name is Bill Welker. You're listening to episode 194 of the podcast, or you're joining us live on YouTube or Facebook. Today is Sunday, June 7th, and we are coming off of an awesome card of UFC 250 from the APEX in Las Vegas, Nevada. Before we get into that, I want to introduce the other folks on the line here. I am joined all the way from Columbus, Ohio, by the producer of MMA Trufan, podcast docuseries about MMA that we're definitely going to get into, Mr. Nate Evans. Nate, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Bill. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well, man. Doing real well. And of course, my co-pilot all the way from New Jersey, Jeff, the Animal Wilson. Jeff, how you feeling on this Sunday morning, my friend? Little change of time, change of scenery?
Yeah, no, I'm all for it. I'm not totally awake yet, but let's do it.
Well, hopefully the caffeine starts to kick in as we get going. Did you have yourself some nice tea or something? Some black tea?
Yeah, I had some green tea to get started. So
there you go. Nice jump start. I know you're not a coffee guy. Are you a coffee guy, Nate?
I used to be, but I'm more of a tea guy now. I drink a lot of iced tea for my caffeine fix.
Oh, okay. Iced tea. Yeah, it's getting to be summertime, so iced tea is the way to go. You guys have a pretty brutal winter up there in Ohio?
Well, I live just below the snow belt. Like if you look at the weather in Ohio during the wintertime, you can see like a distinct line. Like up by Cleveland, it's brutal, obviously. Like Cleveland, Buffalo, New York, it's awful. But like Columbus is, I don't know, a lot more mild, so kind of like Pittsburgh, Northern Virginia type climate. Like we are like the same, I don't know, would be latitude. I don't even know what it is now, as like DC area, like Maryland. So it's not too bad, but we get snow. We didn't get any snow last year. I got my kid sleigh riding stuff. My 4-year-old, I bought him sleds, bought him snow pants, all this stuff. Didn't get any snow. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. So.
That's the way it goes as a parent, right? And then the next year they're growing out of it. So
exactly, that's exactly it. Like next year, I got to buy him new snow pants. So
yeah, so you got to pass them down to the next kid, or
yeah.
Or was that the youngest that you bought it for?
He's the older one. I have a 2-year-old, so I just pass it down to him. So
there you go. You got to be resourceful. Yeah, any snow is too much snow for me. That's why I moved to Florida a couple of years ago. So let's get into some MMA talk. It's awesome to have MMA to talk about, of course. UFC 250, headlined by the consensus greatest female fighter of all time, Amanda Nunes. And it's getting to be even a hindrance for her, because not even all the way through beating up Felicia Spencer for 25 minutes, the broadcasting team is talking about who's she even going to fight next, because she's cleared out 2 divisions. But let's give her credit for the actual performance. I'll start with you, Nate. What do you think about the Lioness last night?
I mean, what more is there to say? I mean, she just annihilated Spencer. I mean, gotta give Spencer a lot of credit. She showed a lot of toughness in there, but she was finished from the first minute. I mean, Nunes is just, I mean, she's probably pound for pound best fighter in the world right now. And, it's kind of crazy to say with guys like John Jones and Khabib and others out there, but how do you say she isn't? I mean, she just annihilated Spencer. I mean, totally dominated her from start to finish. Probably got 2 or 3 10-8 rounds in there. I know the judges didn't see it that way, but I don't know. I mean, 3, 4, and 5, I thought were all 10-8 rounds. I saw some people saying all 5 or 10-8. I don't know about that, but
yeah.
There were some people who thought that they should have thrown in the towel earlier. I don't know. I don't know why it went to a 5th round, but I mean, hats off to both of them. Spencer did a great job. I mean, just staying in there.
Yeah.
But I mean, this like reminds me of those like GSP fights. I know we're talking about GSP, but how GSP like annihilated Fitch, annihilated Hardy. People are like, Hardy's doing such a good job hanging in there. Well, yeah, he's getting devastated. He's getting trounced. And that's what we saw last night, I thought,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you got to give credit to the toughness of Felicia Spencer. I mean, she's gone the distance with 2 of the scariest women on the planet in Nunes and Cyborg. But Yeah, Amanda Nunes looked like she was just really enjoying herself in there. She was laughing, and she said she knew from the first round that Felicia didn't have anything for her, and you could tell after the first round, after the first minute, like you said, Nate, that who the better fighter was. And I was even saying, I had a couple of buddies over last night, socially distancing, of course. We all sat 6 feet apart. But somewhere in the second round, I said, we already know who the better fighter is. You know, even if Felicia Spencer had some kind of miracle comeback and catches Amanda, like, she's going to be the champion, but we still already established who the better fighter is. Give me your thoughts on this main event, Jeff.
Dude, I agree with both of you. I thought there was a left hand in the first round, and you could just see all over Felicia Spencer's face that she did not enjoy it, and she got hit hard. She didn't go down, but there was definitely some tells there that she got hit hard and she didn't like it. And at the end of this fight, man, poor Felicia Spencer, she's got cuts under both eyes. Her nose is all swollen up. She's got this huge hematoma on her forehead. She didn't look like she'd been in a fight. She looked like she'd gotten hit by a car or something.
Yeah, it was.
She did.
It was pretty brutal. That hematoma was pretty nasty. But yeah, I guess the only thing left to talk about, and they got into it on the broadcast because they were tired of talking about Felicia Spencer getting trounced, is what's next for the champ Amanda Nunes. I mean, she's cleared out 2 divisions. Felicia Spencer, a lot of people thought wouldn't be a challenge for her, but she was the only contender available and willing to step up. You know, what do you do with this chick? I mean, not a bad problem to have, but a problem nonetheless. So what do you think, Nate?
Well, I mean, I saw Megan Anderson writing on Twitter, I think this morning, like, you know, look out for me. Don't count me out. I mean, I think she's just chumming the water for Nunes. I mean, she's just going to get chewed up, but I don't know what she does next. I mean, she fights Anderson, blows her out of the water. I mean, does she go back down and fight and invite Shevchenko? I don't know. I mean, I think she's too big to go back down. I mean, she looked like a full 145 last night. I mean, she looked like she was ready to get in there and fight guys. I mean, I know we're never going to see it. It's probably not going to happen ever. But I mean, I think there are some men in this sport that she could beat for sure. But I don't know who she fights. I mean, I don't know what else there is. I mean, do they bring Cyborg back and have her get beaten up again? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things where it's a good problem to have. It's kind of like where John Jones was about, you know, a few years ago before he had the legal problems. Like, you know, he beat Cormier the second time. Then what? You know, then what happened? Well, his life went off the rails, and now he's back, and you know, he has some stuff in front of him, and you know, we'll see what happens with him and Dana. But I don't know what you do with Nunes. I really don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think just for parity, you could get her back in there with Kat Zingano to avenge her last loss. But Kat Zingano is so far removed from a title shot, it wouldn't be much more than parity. And I know this has been your hope to see, Jeff. But any other ideas that we're not thinking of here?
I don't know, dude. I mean, looking at the way Amanda Nunes has been lately, just dominating everybody. I don't know if Kat Zingano, you know, fights the same Nunes she fought the first time. I don't think it goes the same way for Zingano either. So I don't know what you do here. The best option would probably be, like you said, Nate, Shevchenko. You know, Shevchenko has 2 losses against Nunes, but they've been close. She's never been out of it. So I don't know. I mean, also, like Nate was saying, Nunes looked like, you know, 145 is a good place for her. And just looking at her yesterday, I could see her struggling to make 135 again in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I don't see why she would want to do that, you know, unless there was some spectacular challenge waiting for her there. I like the Shevchenko fight too, just because in the first fight, I feel like Shevchenko was just finding her stride in the third round. And then the second fight, I thought Shevchenko won the first time I watched it. It was a really close fight. And I wouldn't mind watching it again, but I don't see Nunes wanting to go back down to 135. So the only way to sum it up is it's a problem, but not a bad problem to have. I mean, you have a fighter who's so dominant, there's nobody left to fight them. 32 years old, baby on the way, 2 belts around her waist. She's on top of the world, and you can't help but feel happy for her. She seems like such a bright personality, and just an awesome person. And you know, you got to love to see success for somebody like that. Somebody else who found success for the first time since 2016 was Cody Garbrandt in this co-main event. Cody Garbrandt did not look like himself since he was knocked out by TJ Dillashaw the first time until 4 minutes and 59 seconds of the second round in this fight with Rafael Assunção. He had his spots. He looked a lot faster than Assunção, but he didn't have that same Cody Garbrandt swagger that we were used to. Popping and locking against Dominic Cruz, winning the bantamweight title 4 years ago. Until he took that big duck under and landed that overhand hook that put Assunção to the mat. I've never seen anybody do that to Rafael Assunção because I don't think it's ever been done, even in the practice room anywhere. Jeff, I'll start with you this time. Give me your thoughts on the co-main event here.
Dude, I was really excited to see Cody Garbrandt get back in the win column. I'm a fan of his, but at the same time, there were things that, like you said, he didn't look like the guy who beat Dominic Cruz. I don't know if it's because of that back injury that's been bothering him the last couple of years. I heard that he was working with a sports psychologist to kind of get his head right. But something definitely clicked yesterday. So I was definitely happy to see him win. And, that last sequence where he kind of ducked under the jab was really reminiscent of that fight with Dominic Cruz. So I was happy that we saw some glimpses of that Cody Garbrandt. And, I've always been someone who says that if Cody can fight the way he fought Dominic Cruz, I don't think he would have lost to TJ. I don't think he would have lost to TJ twice. So, absolutely, I love seeing him a little bit more methodical. He was definitely not staying in one spot against the Assunção. He wasn't just keeping his head in the pocket. He was definitely showing some more head movement. His feints were really good. So, I like that we're seeing him get back to that. For me, I've always felt like you got to do what brought you to the dance. And for Cody Garbrandt, it definitely worked out yesterday.
Not just a duck under, it was like a full body swing under that brought him into that hook. And hopefully, that was the knockout that gave him the confidence that he was lacking for the last 4 years or so, because he just didn't look the same, even in the beginning of this fight. If you looked in his eyes, shout out to our buddy Renzo Altuna, who's tuning in from Peru. Friend of the show, of course. Nate, I'll defer to you on this co-main event. Give us your thoughts here.
Well, I mean, I thought he looked sharp. He may not have had that confidence in his eyes, but I mean, his speed, his hands, his timing, his quickness was all right, spot on. I mean, they're talking about his work with Mark Henry, and I know DC and Rogan were both talking about how Mark Henry's one of the top trainers in the world today, and Cody certainly looked like he put the work in. I mean, he looked sharp, he looked crisp, his footwork looked nice. He was a little gun shy at first against Assunção. A lot of people thought Garbrandt was going to lose that fight. I mean, from looking on social media, like, it was pretty well evenly split as far as what people thought who's going to win. And I thought Cody dominated that fight start to finish. It seemed like Assunção started to get his bearings a little bit, started to get that timing down, started to figure it out a little bit, and then all of a sudden, I mean, Cody just wasted him. I mean, that crouch down, torque, corkscrew punch. A lot of times you see someone throw one of those big haymakers and it will like graze the top of the head and like kink the head a little bit and, put him out that way. This was like knuckles on the face, just obliterated him. I mean, one of the best one punch knockouts you'll ever see. And I'm sure we'll talk about another one punch knockout in a minute, but that one by Garbrandt was just unbelievable. I mean, left him face down, palms up, and then you see they got him back on the stool.
Yeah.
He couldn't stay on the stool. They had to put him down. That's scary, When someone comes to then goes back out again, I mean, you're looking at a serious concussion there.
Yeah, for sure. And unfortunately, I feel like Assunção is one of these guys that's never going to get the credit he deserves. If you look at this guy's resume, he's got a win over Jorge Masvidal. Here's a guy who fights at 135 pounds, and Masvidal's fighting at 170 now. I mean, granted, it was way earlier in their career, 15 years ago or something off the top of my head. I'd have to check. But the things that he's accomplished will probably go unsung at at the end of his career, whenever that may be. I think he's 37, 38 years old now. He, never realized that UFC title. So unfortunate for him, but, good to see Cody Garbrandt hopefully, get that confidence back. He's going to be a problem in this division. And sticking with this division, another problem for a lot of people is going to be Aljamain Sterling, who made quick work of Corey Sandhagen. I favored Aljo in this fight, but I saw it being a lot more competitive. When I first heard it announced, I was like, wow, this is going to be a great scrap. And Aljamain just climbed up Corey Sandhagen like a bear climbing up a tree and put him unconscious. Sandhagen was just like, I guess tapping while he was unconscious, because when Sterling let go, he was left out cold on the mat. So Nate, let's start with you. Give me your thoughts on Aljo here.
I mean, in a night full of impressive performances, this one impressed me the most. How he just went in there and, like you said, he climbed up Sandhagen like a tree and took him right down, tapped him right out. Mm-hmm. And again, this is another one that was like a pick'em fight for a lot of people. I mean, you have, I think, what was it, 2 and 4? I think Sterling was 2, Sandhagen was 4 going into this fight.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that, Garbrandt's a bigger name, but I still don't know why this was a co-main over, why that was a co-main over this fight. But anyways, it doesn't matter really now. Mm-hmm. But I mean, Sterling, people have a hard time with him. I thought before that he should be the next one to fight Cejudo over Jan, but I mean, Jan deserves it too. I don't know why Jan. Who's Jan going to fight next? Aldo? Is that who it is? Yeah. And all respect in the world to Aldo, but what's going on here? Why wasn't it Sterling? It should be Sterling fighting Jan. And I know, it's going to happen down the road. I mean, Sterling has to be next. I mean, Sterling has to be the first one to fight the winner of that fight. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it was disappointing for Cejudo to walk away, and people want to say he's the best ever. I mean, I don't think so, because he had 2 people sitting in front of him that he should have fought and beat, and I don't think he could beat either one of them. To be honest with you, like, yeah. I think both Jan and Sterling both beat him, but that's just my opinion. It means nothing more than anyone else's. But I mean, Sterling. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, he disposed of him, and I don't even know what was the time on that. Probably 2 minutes last night, and I mean, totally minute 28. Yeah, a minute 28. He submitted Sandhagen, who was on a 7-fight win streak. I think he had 3 or 4 submissions in his last 7 fights,
and never been finished.
Never been finished.
Yeah,
never been finished. Finish him in under 90 seconds.
Yeah.
So
I
mean,
impressive.
So like I'm sure Sarah and Longo and Henzo and all the boys in New York and Long Island are really happy about it, and they should be, because he was amazing last night.
Yeah, hell yeah. Big fan of Ray Longo, friend of the show as well. I've been up there to their facility, and they just have like they're a family up there, and it's awesome to when their guys win, they're all genuinely happy for each other, and you got to love to see that, because I've been around a lot of gyms, and it's a rare vibe. So Jeff, give me your thoughts on Aljamain Sterling here, and what do you think lies ahead? I think Nate pretty much nailed it on the head for the landscape of the division here, but give me your thoughts, Jeff.
Yeah, dude, I think you have to give it to Aljo next. And, Bill, I'll always root for these Renzo Gracie guys. We're Renzo Gracie guys. But, man, he made Corey Sandhagen look like a chump in there, dude. Like, if you've never seen Corey Sandhagen fight before and you're basing your opinion on him off this fight, just hold it. Just go back and watch some of his fights. This guy's for real. And, for Aljamain Sterling to do what he did, I think that's a huge feather in anybody's cap, especially in this bantamweight division where things are kind of uncertain at the top. I think Aljo made a huge statement last night, and he looked great doing it. I mean, he dominated Corey Sandhagen. You don't see a lot of guys do that to him. This is Corey Sandhagen's second loss as a professional. Like you said, never been finished before, coming off a 7-fight win streak where he beat Rafael Assunção, John Lineker, who neither of those guys is a pushover by any means. So, Corey Sandhagen's for real. And, Aljo just made an exclamation point in this bantamweight division.
Yeah, and I think Aljo, he said it himself. He learned a big lesson in in the Marlon Moraes fight. He's like, I've already experienced the worst thing that could happen in there. Why not take more risks? I know what it's like to get knocked out cold. And, I think that's a great attitude. And I think that comes, from the camp that he's training with. And then you still have Marlon Moraes around. You got TJ Dillashaw coming back. Probably the worst time Cejudo could have picked to take his ball and run away, because we're looking at possibly the most exciting time ever for this bantamweight division. It's got new life breathed back into it, especially with Cody Garbrandt back. We got a lot of interesting matchups we could make. You have, 3 or 4 guys you could argue are deserving of fighting for this vacant title. And that's a fun thing. Neil Magny broke his 3-way tie for the second most wins in the welterweight division last night, with a unanimous decision over Anthony Rocco Martin. So now he has the second most wins in that division behind GSP, a name I feel like we're going to be bringing up a couple of times on this podcast, even though, GSP hasn't been active lately, but it's going to be relevant. You guys will see. Jeff, I'll start with you on this one. This was a close fight. I feel like Magny ran away with it in that third round. He just put that Magny pace, that third round Magny pace that he's famous for, and kind of ran away with it. One judge gave it 30-27. I don't know if I totally agree with that. I thought it was, maybe Martin won that first round, but give me your thoughts, Jeff.
Bill, I'll be honest with you. To me, it looked like Rocco Martin was breathing a little bit heavier after that first round. And after that second round, it felt like he was kind of out of it in the third round, breathing heavy, not really fighting off the takedown attempts or the wrestling of Neil Magny. So, for me, I thought it went the right way. I wasn't too upset about it, but credit to both of these guys. Neil Magny's a really tough dude. He's really durable in there. I think he's former military, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a tough guy, man. And he's not somebody who's going to get tired. So good for Neil Magny. I would just like to see him try to crack somebody in the top 10 now. I think he's at that level where he's racked up enough wins, and now it's time to see how he does against one of the top guys, especially in this welterweight division that is pretty uncertain. We don't know who Kamaru Usman is going to fight next, so I'd like somebody to, kind of make an exclamation point, kind of like Aljo did for the bantamweight division last night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you look at his losses in recent memory, 2 years ago, the loss to Ponzinibbio, and then RDA, Lorenz Larkin, who's very largely underrated, and then Damian Maia. And those are 4 losses over a 5-year span, but they are each like setbacks at just the right time for Magny that didn't let him keep climbing that ladder, unfortunately. So Nate, where are you at with Neil Magny? What'd you think of his performance?
I like Neil Magny a lot. Like, I thought it was a good fight. I thought it was a close fight, obviously, and I agree that I thought Martin won that first round, but I thought Magny won the second too. You could even call that last round a 10-8 for him, in my opinion, because even though he didn't almost finish him, he dominated it from start to finish, and he kept that pressure on him. Magny's like this guy who, if he could just get to the point where he's doing 5-round fights, he's probably going to win every 5-round decision against most 5 through 10 ranked guys because of his conditioning, because of his pressure. Once he gets the rounds 3, 4, 5, he just kicks it in overdrive. But problem is, he's sometimes down 0-2 going into the third round, and that's kind of what was possibly happening last night. Even though I thought he won that second round fairly. But it was a really good win for him. He came back with that win in March. Was it March? I think it was against Li. No, maybe not March. Li Jingling.
Yeah,
but
everything kind of blends together with.
I know he had that bad loss to Ponzinibbio, and Ponzinibbio I think is grossly underrated. That's a guy that I want to see get back in that division. But he had that fight with Ponzinibbio where he was holding his eye, and Ponzinibbio was just teeing off on him. And personally, I thought that fight should have been stopped earlier. But it was a great win for him. I'm curious to see where he goes from here. I agree with Jeff that he should be fighting a top 10 guy next. I do want to see him fight someone 5 through 10 somewhere. I I want to see where he goes from here, because 170 is pretty heavy at the top, but there's some room in there, 5 through 10 for him to fit in, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to see him, get a single digit number next to his name in the near future. So the first fight on the main card delivered exactly what the UFC was hoping for. I think Sean O'Malley did to Eddie Wineland what Eddie Wineland was brought in to get done to him. Get knocked out in spectacular fashion. Now, there was always the chance that Eddie Wineland could catch O'Malley and knock him out, but that's a win-win for the UFC. But I think that what they were hoping for, judging by the pre-scripted tweets that were released at the end of this fight, was a spectacular finish from Sean O'Malley, and that's what we got. He feinted with that uppercut and then landed a right straight with the same hand. Never took his eyes off the target. Just laser-like accuracy and crazy power for a guy has such a lanky build in this division. I'll start with you, Nate. Give me thoughts on the Sugar Show here.
Well, it's exactly what the UFC wanted to happen. It's exactly what most people wanted to happen and thought was going to happen. I mean, he went in there and just flatlined him. And I want to see Sean O'Malley go in there and fight some real competition. And I don't want to say that Wineland wasn't real competition, but what was he like O'Malley was like a minus 500 going into that. I mean, to me, it almost feels like he's like this Michael Venom Page of the UFC, where they just keep feeding him, fodder to just keep getting these wins and highlight reels and stuff. He needs to go out there and fight somebody. I mean, he needs to get he needs to fight a top 10 guy that's going to push it, that's going to push the pace on him, that's going to make him work. And I just don't see it yet. I mean, I know he was out for a while because he had the suspension, I think it was. I don't know if it was a drug suspension. I can't remember exactly what it was. I don't want to label him as anything. But I mean, he's a great fighter, a lot of potential. He has the world in the palm of his hand, but he has to go out and fight somebody now. Like, what's going on? Like, he needs a big fight against a big time competitor to see where he is as a fighter.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, right? Because he has this huge, larger than life personality, and he's already a draw. But at the same time, you don't want to feed him to the wolves right away, because then you lose all that pop he's got behind him. But he's been in there with some tough guys, Sukumtad and Quinones. Those are solid competitors. I mean, Wineland is a guy who, he's going to knock you out or he's going to get knocked out at this point in his career. And that's kind of what we saw from him. But he got that highlight reel that the UFC was hoping for. Everybody's wanting to fight this guy, but you can't put him in there with like a Merab who's going to maul him for 3 rounds and just keep taking him down relentlessly and is not going to get baited into like a slugfest. So yeah, I'd be curious to see what's next for him. I have a feeling they're going to try and make a very calculated move. I like the Michael Venom Page analogy as well. Give me your thoughts on the Sugar Show here.
Yeah, Bill, I agree with Nate 100%. Eddie Wineland is definitely dangerous, and that's what I would have told you in 2015, Bill. I mean,
that's so true, right? Perfect.
Like, dude, I love Eddie Wineland. He's one of my favorite bantamweights. He's got knockout power. Shout out to Alexander Au, greeting us from Fort Lee, New Jersey. But dude, he should have retired in 2015, man. I love Eddie Wineland. He's got the knockout power. Definitely one of the hardest hitters in the bantamweight division. But again, all of this is what I was thinking 5 years ago. He's definitely a feeder to Sugar Sean O'Malley here, which I hate saying because I love Eddie Wineland. But dude, I'm with Nate on this one. I feel like if you give him somebody in the top of this division, one of these, grapple heavy guys who have made their careers off of wrestling and jiu-jitsu, I think O'Malley definitely struggles. I don't see him, beating one of the top 5 guys yet. But I also like what they're doing. A great comparison to Michael Venom Page. I like that they're doing that because when they, it failed before when they did it with Sage Northcutt, and they kind of threw him to the wolves a little too early. And Sage Northcutt, so much potential. Everybody thought he was going to be a future UFC champion. So I think that they don't want to. I think that the UFC doesn't want to repeat those mistakes with Sean O'Malley, and you can't totally blame them for that. Like you said, O'Malley's definitely got that it factor. He's got the crazy hair. He's got a cool attitude. He seems like somebody you'd want to hang out with. Definitely has some star power. So I think that they're really, really wading him into these bantamweight waters here.
Yeah, for sure. Especially because you have like such an exciting landscape right now, like we were talking about earlier. So yeah, bummer for Eddie Wineland. I've always been a fan of his as well. He's always been an exciting fighter. One of those guys that has that rare punching power at the lower weight classes, but just ran into the wrong kid at the wrong time. All right, so another one that didn't go the way the UFC was hoping is the anti-O'Malley that they're trying to build up here. Chase Hooper. They're like, the good and evil version of the same guy. But Hooper's like this young innocent kid, 20 years old, killing it on the local circuits. Looked impressive on the Contender Series. They had to bring him in. Won his UFC debut. All right, who's a guy we could give him that has some name recognition and has the ability to get submitted? Alex Caceres. Let's put him in there with him, and hope he gets that submission. I'm speculating here purely, but that's not the way it went. He got pieced up by Alex Caceres for 15 minutes and resorted to pulling guard, which really irks me. As a wrestler, I cannot stand people pulling guard, even in jiu-jitsu. Forget about in MMA. It's just not like, if you want the fight on the mat, like learn to get the fight to the mat. But I like Chase Hooper. I do. I want to see the kid do well, because he seems like a really good kid, even though he has fought one of my teammates in one of the local shows. But yeah, Nate, I know you didn't have a chance to catch all the prelims, but I know you probably know the results, and just give me your thoughts here on Chase Hooper and Alex Caceres with an impressive victory over a kid that he was brought in to lose to, essentially.
Well, I mean, that's one of the beauties of the sport. You never know what's going to happen. You had this guy Caceres, looks like he's being led in, like you said, to get beat. He's like lamb being led to the slaughter. And I didn't get to watch it last time. I'm gonna watch it today because I had some company over last night, and but I plan to watch it today. But I mean, it just shows like anything can happen in a fight, and it's one of the reasons why we love this sport. Like anything can happen on any given night, and part of it is who's getting up for the fight in that moment. Like it doesn't matter. Kind of like something like I talked to St. Pierre about a while ago is if they fight 10 times, it might be a different result each time. But what happens in that moment and that fight and that night? And, anything can happen on any given night, like I said. So, I mean, to see this happen, surprising, but, not the most surprising thing in the world, because crazier things have happened in the sport.
Oh, for sure. And then it kind of showed the level of Chase Hooper is at. Like his striking is, he's got good fundamentals, but as far as getting in there with a creative striker that he can't get to the ground, and even in pulling guard, he can't really do anything with it. Maybe it was too much too soon for this young stud. I think he's got a bright future. Probably took a lot more damage than he needed to in this fight. Give me your thoughts, Jeff.
Yeah, I kind of thought Chase Hooper would run away with this one, just because, Alex Caceres, he's kind of been the fall guy, for lack of a better term, in this division. He hasn't had too much good luck lately, but he's still a tough dude. And like you said, Bill, Chase Hooper, he just couldn't figure out Caceres game plan. He couldn't get his timing right. So, you know, Chase Hooper still has a long way to go. But like you said, definitely a bright star in this featherweight division. I think he's going to do great things once he gets a little bit more experience under his belt. But yeah, Bill, I always laugh when you say that he's like the antithesis to Sean O'Malley, because if you look at pictures of them next to each other, it's like that video game character, and then you can pick like a different outfit for him. That's what
I saw a great meme. It was said like before and after trying meth.
I saw that too. Yeah, it's great.
That was a great one. I wish I remember who made it. I like to give credit for a good meme. But let's move on here. Ian Heinisch picking up some more momentum in this middleweight division with a first round TKO over Gerald Meerschaert. It was the classic wrestler finish here, where they change levels and then come over the top with an overhand right. It's textbook old school wrestler striking. And it worked on Meerschaert, who's very technically sound on the feet. No more for his grappling, but, training with Duke Rufus, obviously he's got a good striking background, but Heinisch, did an awesome job. He was in control of this fight from the start. You could tell he was the stronger man in there. And you guys listening all know I'm a big fan of Gerald Meerschaert. I've been high on him since his UFC debut. Real veteran. But Heinisch looking good in there, man. Give me your thoughts, Jeff.
Yeah, Bill, I don't have too much to tell you. I mean, Ian Heinisch just went in there and whooped ass, dude. Just from the first bell, he was going for the finish, which I love to see. And Ian Heinisch, dude, he just looks like a comic book superhero. Like, the dude looks like he's chiseled out of stone.
Yeah.
Listen, he's definitely someone to watch out for in this middleweight division, as is Gerald Meerschaert. But, dude, Ian Heinisch just went in there with the right and the left, and, it was like watching Francis Ngannou against, what was his last fight?
Rosenstrike?
Yeah, against Rosenstrike. Thank you. That's what it reminded me of, man. But good for Ian Heinisch, dude. He's an exciting fighter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Nate, any thoughts on this one?
It's another one that I heard about, but I haven't seen. But Heinisch is a great fighter. To hear him do that level change overhand right, I mean, that's something that, classic wrestling technique, like Couture pioneered that like 20 years ago, when he, like, first time he beat Liddell was just at that level change overhand right, because you think he's going to do this and he does that, and he made it work. He got the big win with it.
Yeah, for sure. Chad Mendez was an expert at that.
Another one of that. Yeah, very good at that.
He would mix it up too. He would go from the level change and fake the right and come with a hook, and like he mixed it up a little bit. But that was a classic move from Ian Heinisch. Definitely the most emotionally charged fight of the night. It's hard to even talk about. Cody Stamann tragically lost his brother Jacob a week ago, 18 years old. There's not a lot of people in Cody Stamann's shoes who are even getting in the cage after something like that happens. The only thing I can think of that's comparable is when Ronnie Yahya fought I think it was 2 weeks after his mother passed away. And fighters are emotional people, most of them. They thrive on emotions, and they can be crippled by emotions. But most people are not going to be able to get in the cage, nonetheless put on a spectacular performance against a tough competitor like Brian Kelleher. And Cody Stamann, I thought, looked phenomenal in there, moving up a weight class and dealing with that heavy burden on his heart, losing his little brother. Man, just broke down at the end of the fight. Joe Rogan started to tear up in the post fight. Just so much emotion, and even if you're a big fan of Brian Kelleher, how do you not root for Cody Stamann here in this situation? Jeff, give me your thoughts here.
Bill, huge credit to Cody Stamann here. Just being able to hold it together until the end of that fight, and looking so composed and calculated in there. He was very methodical. He fought very smart against Brian Kelleher. He looked great at 145. But yeah, dude, you just by watching his fight, you wouldn't suspect that he had gone through such a big tragedy in his life, because he was able to maintain that composure and that focus. So huge credit to Cody Stamann. Brian Kelleher didn't make it easy for him either. He looked really good in there too. But once Stamann figured out his timing and got his distance right, he was able to grind out that fight. So, good on both of these guys. And, we send our condolences to Cody Stamann and his family, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Jacob Stamann on the minds of everybody in the wake of UFC 250, and now Cody Stamann will be able to go home and mourn his brother, who was his biggest fan, and he was the reason that he decided to get in the cage and win it for him, and you got to be happy for him. He was able to get in there and do that. Nate, I know you didn't catch the fight, but I'm sure you heard about it and about all the circumstances surrounding it. So just give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, very, very emotional, horrible situation. Hopefully Cody gets to be able to go through the proper grieving process now. Good for him on a big win. Mm-hmm. And, like I heard, it was a very, very, very hard interview for both Stamann and Rogan afterward. Mm-hmm. Best wishes to him in the future. Something that's kind of interesting about this kind of situation is that it can really impact the grieving process, because you naturally want to go one way, but you have to go the other. Like when I spoke with Kevin Randleman's sister prior to Randleman's fight with Fedor in Pride, his father died 2 weeks before the Fedor fight. And his sister mm-hmm. said how that Kevin really never got to grieve properly because of it, because he was so laser focused on Fedor. And of course, that was the fight where he slammed Fedor on his head and is well known for that. But, he never really got to go through that proper mm-hmm. process because of it, because then then he's off doing something else afterward, But so, I mean, hopefully he gets to, hopefully Cody Stamann and his family get to go through the full process for themselves, for the long term.
Yeah, for sure. And Stamann said he wants to go back to 135, where he only has one loss, and that was the knee bar loss to Aljamain Sterling, which, obviously no shame in losing to that guy. So bright future for him. It really speaks to the psychology of fighting. Like, these guys have to go out and do something on a public platform that's really hard to do. And, they have personal lives and things that happen in their personal lives. And sometimes they're publicized, sometimes they're not. Sometimes we find out after the fact. It's something that just really plays into the psychology of it all, and something that's, tragic and fascinating at the same time. I want to put a bow on this card, so I'm going to quickly go over the last 4 fights, and I'll let you guys tell me which fighter out of these 4 impressed you the most. Maki Pitolo getting the second round TKO over Charles Byrd. Just a phenomenal combination, and then took him down and pounded him out. Alex Perez getting a TKO over Hussier Formiga with leg kicks, just that low calf kick Formiga couldn't stand anymore, so Keith Peterson had to step in 4 minutes into the first round. Devin Clark weathered the storm against Alonzo Menefield, who hit him with some big shots, probably fractured his orbital on his left eye, but Devin Clark just stayed tenacious, stayed on top of him, pressured him for 3 rounds, came away with the unanimous decision. And then you would think that Aljo's minute 28 submission over Cody Sandhagen was the quickest on the card, but it wasn't. Herbert Burns, minute 20 seconds, submits Evan Dunham with a rear naked choke. No easy task there, submitting Evan Dunham, nevertheless, in a minute and 20 seconds. Nate, I'll start with you. Without having seen the fights, just hearing the results, who impresses you the most here?
Well, I mean, to hear that Dunham got submitted in the fastest one of the night, I mean, like, it's, most impressive. It'll be interesting to see what happens with all these guys going forward. I mean, all impressive finishes, all impressive performances. I'm just really curious to see where they all go next.
For sure. Jeff, what do you got?
Bill, for me, the most impressive out of those three fights was, for me, it was Alex Perez, able to beat Jussier Formiga, who's a very tough competitor in the flyweight division, able to beat him with leg kicks, Bill, and the last one kind of just grazed his patella with the toes. It looked like it didn't even fully make contact, and you just saw Formiga just fall back. He couldn't put weight on that leg anymore. So for me, that was the most impressive on the undercard.
I'll tell you what will impress me the most is if Maki Pitolo survives when he gets home to his wife, because in his post-fight interview, he says, "Shout out to my wife. I love you, baby. Happy birthday. She turns shout out to my kids." So he either one forgot how old his wife is and is probably going to catch some hands when he gets back home to Hawaii, or he realized he shouldn't say his wife's age.
That's interesting.
Either way, he should have just left it at happy birthday and it would have been fine. But otherwise, he kind of put his foot in his mouth there. So that was a really funny moment for me. But I thought he looked impressive against Charles Berg too, just lit him up. So I'll go with that just for something different. But every one of these fights was awesome. So if you guys out there listening missed the prelims, you got nothing to do on a dreary Sunday like it is here in Florida. It's been raining all day, raining all weekend actually. Then go back on your ESPN Plus app and check out these fights. All right, that's it for UFC 250. A lot more to digest there than I anticipated, but we have some things to talk about with you, Mr. Evans. So the founder and producer of the MMA Trufan podcast. And now I have told you privately that I personally am usually not a fan of podcasts that are kind of produced and have music to them and are kind of like a storytelling model. I love this show.
Thank you.
I listened to the first one I listened to was the Kevin Randleman episode. But before I get too far into it, since you're the creator of the show, why don't you tell us what it's all about before I kind of give my take on it?
Well, Trufan is really for, just like the name says, it's for the truest fans of the sport who want to know more about these people than you can get in a post-fight interview or something, surface level. We do a deep dive into their lives. We talk to people who know them, talk to past opponents, training partners, coaches, and try to do a full in-depth biography on their life and career. Mm-hmm. And we talk to these people. We do interviews with all of them. We take clips out and put them in the documentary. So when we're talking about Kevin Randleman's, college career as a wrestler, we talked to his wrestling coach. We talked to Mark Coleman, who was one of his wrestling coaches at the time. So you hear it from people with firsthand knowledge, which I feel gives it more, makes it more interesting, I guess, for lack of a better term, than just me saying it, because I can go and do all the research in the world, but these people have stories and information that have never been told. So we're trying to uncover those stories, trying to get those stories out there and pay tribute to these people as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys definitely do an awesome job with that. I tuned into that Randleman episode first, and I was hooked from start to finish. And there was information in there that I never knew. And I'm a huge Kevin Randleman fan. I thought I knew, so much about him. And I know a lot about MMA. And people get a lot of that background knowledge from me here on MMA on the Rocks. But what I do is more like the drunken history version of MMA.
It's awesome. I love your show, by the way. I do. I love the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. But what you guys do is very different and in a good way. You guys are actually bringing like real information. Whereas I'm like, yeah, I think Kevin Randleman like one time like body slammed a guy off the Empire State Building. That probably happened. You guys are actually talking to people. Yeah, that's true. Let's just say it's true. It's on the internet now, so it's true.
Right,
Somebody's going to take that and run with it, and there's going to be some clickbait blog about it tomorrow. But what you guys do is so impressive, where you actually aggregate all this information from people who actually knew him and interacted with him, and Randleman had to be one of the more difficult ones, I assume, since he's one of the only ones I believe that's no longer living that you've done so far.
That's correct. Yeah.
Am I right with that? Was that a bigger challenge to kind of put that all together?
It was. Well, it was the first one. You know, I met Randleman at a show in Atlantic City in 2001. I think it was the night that Tito fought Tanner, UFC 28 or 29, something like that. And such a nice guy, just a super person, you know, and talked to him for probably 15 minutes or so. And when you talk to somebody, if they're really interested in you and what you have to say, and he was, he looked you in the eye and shook your hand and talked to you like you're his friend. And so when we started doing this series, we talked about people who do we want to focus on, and the first one was Randleman. There's no question about it. And for that reason, because my co-creator Rich Donahue and I, we both met him that night. We're both huge fans of his, and we wanted to pay tribute to him. And he was not in the Hall of Fame at the time. He's been since it's been announced he's going to be inducted. But back then, it's like we just didn't think he's getting his proper due. We thought he was a Hall of Famer then. He's a Hall of Famer now, and people need to understand more about these people, and that kind of developed the whole concept for the series. Well, we need to know more about him. We need to know more about these other people, like Rodrigo Nogueira, who I think is one of the greatest fighters of all time, and isn't often mentioned in that conversation. And so he's one of these people who, not necessarily Nogueira, but Randleman, kind of seemingly slipping through the cracks in a way. And we wanted to celebrate their legacy, celebrate their careers, and it was harder talking about him with people because of the raw emotion. The fact that he passed so tragically at a young age of pneumonia, which seems like something that people can often recover from. Yeah. And how can someone who is such a super athlete, such a super person, pass away from something like that? And so that kind of launched the idea for the whole series. And once we started talking to these people, then we started talking to them about themselves, like Coleman and Boss and Couture, and it kind of snowballed from there. But it really wasn't with that intention. It was just let's do good work on Randleman and see where it goes from there. And it's just progress, I guess.
Yeah. You kind of answered another question I had for you, and that would be because just going down the list, I guess do you separate this by seasons, or you just release them periodically, or whenever you have the time, or what's the release schedule like?
Well, the first 8 we did were done as a season, and they were done weekly last year. Randleman, Ken Shamrock, Couture, Nogueira, Boss, Severn, Coleman, Vanderlei Silva, and we release them week by week. But then it's kind of turning into, we had this big gap where we released Silva last in October, Vanderlei Silva last in October, and then here we are, 7 months later, because we've been making them, working on making them, I should say, and here we are, releasing St. Pierre tomorrow. But so we've moved away from the weekly seasonal format, and now we're going to start releasing them every other month, so we can stay ahead of them and keep making them, and so we're not falling behind. So we're going to release St. Pierre tomorrow, Hoist Gracie in August, and then Don Fry in October, and so on from there.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm happy to hear some of those names coming up, and I did have a chance to hear the GSP episode. I got the advanced preview, my journalistic privilege coming in there, I guess. And I appreciate you sending that through. It was awesome. It was longer than the other ones, and it didn't feel like it. It just kind of blew right by. But what I was getting at with my question was, and you kind of already addressed it. Are there any of these that are more sentimental to you? I know you're an Ohio guy, so obviously you started off with Randleman and Coleman in the first season, but which one of these episodes has meant the most so far?
It's hard to say because they're all so special in different ways. And like my favorite fighter of all time was, and still is, Couture, Randy Couture. So that was important to me. Like I would say the Randleman one is probably still the most poignant and sentimental because because of, his tragic passing, and because he's, a super individual, and also people were very forthcoming about him. Not that they weren't in other episodes, but people really genuinely liked Kevin Randleman, and that he's passed, they want to make sure you don't forget about him. So they're very forthcoming with information and stories. And we did this, we did that, like the story about his jaw, how his jaw went out, and how he slammed it off the mat at the NCAA finals to knock it back into place. That's crazy,
Yeah.
And I mean, I did all the research I could. I read for months on it, and to hear Russ Hellickson tell that story just gives me chills still even thinking about it. But, I was always a big fan of St. Pierre. I remember his first fight against Carl Parisian in the UFC. I said then, like that guy's going to be a star. That guy's going to be great. One of those guys I never rooted against, and it's very interesting when you get to talk to these guys, because someone like St. Pierre is very nice and very polite and a very good person, while at the same time in control of the situation. Whereas, he was very polite and just one of the nicest people that I've spoken with on this show, period, by a long shot. But also not a pushover by any means. It's just this is the time I have available, because I have, because also he's talking to me, and then he's going to talk to ESPN right after that. You know what I mean? So it's
wow.
I can't be or ESPN or some other big, outlet. So I can't be holding him off for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But he's very nice and very kind and everything. But at the same time, he's not someone that's going to let anyone push him around, because, he is who he is, and you get the same thing when you hear people who know him talk about him, like Carl Massaro, one of his training partners. Carl's is a Renzo Gracie black belt. He's one of George's longtime training partners, knows him as well as anybody, and says how, George would never go past his red line, how George would train this, he would train this X amount, and this is what he had set. He was regimented, and this is what it's going to be. And if someone wanted to train, let's go an extra round or whatever, he'd be very polite, but no, I'm not doing that,
Yeah.
And he drew a line in the sand in that way, and I kind of felt that a little bit in the interview, whereas, he's very forthcoming, just great. But at the same time, he's in control, and he's not going to let anyone, dictate to him or push him around that way. And I find that very interesting. I find it very, very commendable,
Yeah. It speaks to his success. The level of discipline that he had. He did something that I personally feel like should be impossible, in that he became one of the best wrestlers in MMA without a wrestling background. Striking and some of these other things, jiu-jitsu, you can learn, but I feel like wrestling is something that if you don't start it at a young age and develop a certain tendon strength or whatever the scientific explanation is for it, it's just never going to come.
Right.
You could show somebody a takedown and they could practice it 1,000 times. But if you put them in there against somebody who'd been doing this since they were 4 years old, it's just not gonna work out. And that's the way it goes 99.99% of the time, unless you're George St. Pierre, who can learn a skill like that, that usually should take a lifetime, and he managed to learn it and apply it and become one of the best people at it. But yeah, I liked how you mentioned that, and I'm glad you brought up the Randleman story about him slamming his face on the mat, because I knew that story about him, wrestling in the NCAA championships with a broken jaw. I didn't know that he broke it and then slammed his head on the mat to pop it back into place. That was an awesome detail. And I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to give any spoilers for your show, but that's was okay. Something.
Thank you, though.
But since you brought it up,
right. Yes.
I'll say that was something that blew my mind. And the rest of the episode, it was half nostalgia and half, oh shit, I didn't know that happened. And I thought I knew these stories pretty well. So that's really the awesome thing about the Trufan show. And Jeff, it looks like you got a question right on the tip of your tongue there.
Yeah, Nate. So I've listened to a couple of the episodes. You know, I haven't finished the GSP one yet, um, just because I didn't have too much time. But you know, a lot of production value goes into these, and I just wondered, like, how long does it take you to get all these interviews together and be able to acquire all this knowledge, basically, you know, from primary sources?
Well, it's a very, very, very long and tedious process. It's one of those things where, like, for example, like these episodes, like when we're getting these interviews and I'm calling these people and trying to set up times, and you have to be so flexible because a lot of times, someone, something will come up or they have something else going on or something else like that. And,
Mm.
it's just, I have to understand that I'm not their top priority. They're doing me a favor. So sometimes it gets drawn out.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's usually takes about 2 to 3 months of writing and probably about 4 or 5 months of tracking down all the interviews and getting those done. And it's done throughout, it's done along the way, so to say. So like for these episodes, for example, we have coming out George Hoyce, Don Fry, Frank Shamrock, Dan Henderson, Anderson Silva. We've spent since probably September tracking out the interviews, and we're pretty much done with all of them now. But we want to space out the release of them so that we can keep working ahead. And I'm
Mhm.
working on some other ones now that I'm looking at. But it usually takes probably 4 or 5 months to really track down the interviews that you need, and sometimes you don't even get all the ones you want. There are
Yeah.
there are still a couple that I'm trying to get for the Anderson Silva and the Dan Henderson ones that hopefully they come, but I'm not sure if they're going to. So
Yeah. And those will be awesome too, I'm
Yeah.
sure. Even without those interviews. So you write it and kind of storyboard it out for all the you have like your main points that you want to hit with the episode, and then you kind of try to get sound bites from people that fit into that story. But I'm sure as you're talking to people, you're adding stuff and taking things out, and a lot of rearranging. There's definitely a lot of work that goes into it. I can't stress that enough. That it was blowing my mind when I was hearing how well the stories flow from the start of an episode to the end. And I'm thinking like, well, the most prep I do for a show is like, what am I going to drink today? Do I want whiskey or am I going to get a beer?
yeah,
And then it's like, oh, I forgot to pull up the card for today. So yeah, definitely so much respect for the work you guys do, and it's awesome. But to that point, since you have to storyboard it out and try and find those sound bites and then the sound bites you get have to fit in, is there anything that you've gotten out of an interview that you just couldn't fit into the episode because it didn't fit with the story you were trying to tell, but was just like a really awesome like anecdote or fact or something like that?
Yeah, actually, there's one episode that we just released that's like a cutting room floor type of episode, and we're gonna be releasing more of those. Like one was with Mark Coleman talking about Gary Goodridge, Big Daddy Gary Goodridge, longtime old school fighter, and talking about how Gary appeared on a Japanese game show and he beat 2,000 contestants in arm wrestling in 2 hours. And Gary Goodrich is like a world champion arm wrestler, and so they got him on the show, and he went through 2,000 guys, and it's like I didn't even know what to say, like it's just unbelievable. But it doesn't work for Coleman's story, for Coleman's episode, but it's still a great story. And there's another one with Igor Vovchanchin. Coleman talking about Igor Vovchanchin. Who's one of my favorite fighters of all time, somebody who I want to do an episode on at some point.
I would look forward to that one.
Oh man, he's awesome. But just on a side note, Vovchanchin's one of those guys who's like falling through the cracks that people nowadays don't even know who he is. Like that guy beat 37 people in a row in his prime. But not all of them were top guys because this is back in the late 90s. But anyways, he said of Vovchanchin how Coleman beat him in the finals of the Pride 2000 Grand Prix, and said how when he met Vovchanchin afterwards, he shook his hand, and Vovchanchin's hands were like twice as thick as Coleman's were, and how he was doing shots of whiskey or whatever with Nick Nutter afterward, and how him and Nick became good buddies.
Yeah.
And Nick Nutter was going to fight him, I think in the Middle East, maybe Israel or something like that. I can't remember where it was. Maybe Dubai. But Coleman was training Nick Nutter and getting him ready for the fight and everything. But Coleman couldn't go. So Coleman drives him out to the airport, takes him to it, and he's like, "Okay, like you're on your own now. Like, good luck, bud." And Nutter's like, "What are you talking about? You're not going with me?" So he sent Nick Nutter off like by himself to like Israel to fight Igor Vovchanchyn, and and he got beaten up, he got knocked out or whatever. I can't remember what the result was, but then Vovchanchyn and him became buddies, and then Coleman took Nutter with him to Japan, and they're all buddies after that. But there are lots of stories that come up that just don't really work for the episode that that end up kind of like in like a vault, so to say. And we're gonna do a Patreon where we're gonna put all those in there so people can hear all those episodes, and we're gonna put all the full exclusive interviews in there, because the episodes themselves, as you guys know, are just clips of like this part, that part along the way. Whereas we're gonna put the full interviews, which I think some people probably want to hear. Put the full interviews in there for people to hear for like $1 a month or something like that.
That's awesome. That was actually another question I had for you, is if you were going to release the raw interviews, because it is clipped up, and it's clipped up very well. But I found myself a couple of times like, you would have like a little soundbite from John Danaher talking about GSP, and I was like, man, I would really love to hear like how the conversation led to that point and like how these pieces all came together. But credit to you guys, man, because these stories are all so wild that happen to these guys, especially these guys from back in Pride. Everything that was going on, they were going back and forth to Japan and like doing all this stuff and like, sleeping on floors and like all the partying and everything. Like there must be so many wild stories. It must be hard to like trim it back enough to make an actual storyline from start to finish. And that was the thing that impresses me the most with the MMA Trufan. I can't stress that enough.
Well, thank you. And you hit that right in the head, because that is very challenging. It becomes a bit of a burden because you get all these stories, and you don't want to just throw it all against the wall and hope it sticks, because then it's very disjointed, and you got to have that kind of flow. Otherwise, it's like it just sounds unprofessional. It sounds amateurish. I'm sorry, but it becomes a great challenge when you're trying to weed through all of these, and also have like hours and hours of like audio. Like one of these interviews is typically like some are like only like 10 minutes. Depending on what it is. Like like the Sean Shirk one with GSP, just talking about one fight, pretty quick, and Frank Trigg and Shields was a pretty quick interview for George. Some of them are quite long. Like with George was about 35-40 minutes. Phil Nurse was about an hour. So, trying to trim these down, because also like you saw with George, they're like, George is 2 hours long, and that could have easily become 3 hours long. But like,
yeah,
I mean, you can't keep people can't keep people engaged for 3 hours unless it's like really top of the line material. And, we could have easily ballooned that out to something bigger, but we figure like people who really want to hear more can join us on Patreon, and they can hear those full interviews and get more. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
Definitely. And I think once people start hearing the episodes, they're going to want to hear more, because it's content that you can't really get in one place anywhere else. And yeah, you could have definitely done 3 hours of the GSP, and I would have sat through it. I was not getting a lot done at work because I started that thing, and I found myself just spacing out. Like, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh shit, the colitis and the fight, that was crazy.
Well, like like Danaher talking about the training for Bisping with like the blood everywhere. Like I don't think that is out there yet. Like that kind of detail. Like we know he's had stomach problems and stuff like that. But like how they thought he may have had stomach cancer and stuff like that. I don't think that's out there right now. So there is. Sometimes we do break some stories, like St. Pierre talking about how to become the perfect nemesis with training with different people and stuff like that. I mean, there's all sorts of different things in there. Like something you mentioned a minute ago about St. Pierre's wrestling ability and how it's amazing how he became such a great wrestler. One of the things that's interesting is his training regimen, how he focused so much, how he focused so much on the technique and drilling it the best way and being efficient as possible all the time. And there's actually like a connection between that and Henderson, because when it was working on Dan Henderson, that'll probably come out maybe Christmas or January or so. How Dan was not even the best wrestler in his family. How Dan's older brother, Tom Henderson, was thought to be the better wrestler, and he was bigger, stronger, better. And Bob Anderson was Henderson's longtime coach. He said how Tom was the better wrestler. When they went and wrestled with people in Russia, his whole team, the whole Jets team out of Southern California, went and wrestled with these guys in Russia. They all picked Tom Henderson as being the best one. Mm-hmm. That's because Dan was smaller and hadn't really grown yet, and he was, kind of a late bloomer in that sense. Mm-hmm. But Bob said that during his junior and senior year, he got a lot bigger and he kind of blossomed as Tom. We talked to Tom Henderson too. Tom said how Dan blossomed before his senior year, and because Dan was smaller, he had to focus on having the best technique possible to compensate for his small size. Mm-hmm. So when he did get that big size and he had that good technique, now you have like an Olympic level wrestler. And that's kind of what happened with Dan. It's kind of a similar thing with what happened with George, because George focused so greatly on that technique and trained for so long to develop that technique, mm-hmm. that, once he finally put the pieces together, he was just like unstoppable, and that's kind of similar story with Henderson too, just focusing on that technique. And then finally it just kind of came together for him,
And it's even more impressive that he did it without overexerting himself in training, because if you ask any wrestler, right, how do you get better at wrestling? It's you have to overexert yourself every day, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to do it. But apparently, George proves that wrong. And I did remember hearing Danaher maybe talk about the colitis somewhere else, because it sounded familiar, but
he did talk about it a little bit with a Rogan one time. He taled about it on his stomach problems. I have watched all these things a million times, but when he's talking about the blood and the cancer scare, like that part, I don't think it's been out there yet.
Yeah, so the only place you guys can hear that story is on the MMA Trufan podcast, and get a couple of the other episodes under your belt before you check out that GSP episode that debuts tomorrow, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Tomorrow, June 8th, it comes out.
Awesome. That's exciting for you guys, and that'll be good. But I definitely encourage you guys to check out some of the earlier episodes, just so you get a feel for how the shows flow. Before you save that GSP episode, build up to it. Jeff, you got any other questions for Nate here?
No, I appreciate it, dude. I loved listening to the Mark Coleman and the Kevin Randleman episodes. I'm going to start on the Vanderlei Silva one later today. But yeah, just the production value and how you get, everything flowing together and just different perspectives. I remember the Kevin Randleman one where the one thing that everybody had in common is everybody talked about how nice Kevin Randleman was, how he was a joker. He'd tell people he was a year younger than he actually was, or a year older. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, dude. And going back to that jaw story, another thing that happened with Kevin Randleman was he asked his coach to punch him in the face to realign his jaw. I'm like, who does that?
Yeah.
So I love it. I really enjoy the show.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And, thanks for having me on today. It was great talking to you guys. I'd love to come back on and talk again, even if we're not talking about my show, just come on and talk about the fights,
Yeah, absolutely. We could have done a whole episode just talking about the Trufan stuff. I feel like we could keep going and kind of go off the rails a little bit and talk about some old school MMA. Maybe we'll set up, a separate episode just to do that. But the main thing I wanted to get across is that if you guys listen to this show, you should check out MMA Trufans, because I really enjoyed it as an MMA Trufan myself. I want to talk.
See what you did there. I see what you did there. Huh? Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly it.
I am a dad, I gotta keep it true to dad form.
That's right.
I do want to get into Fight Night 172, a quick preview. Nate, if you have time to stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's do it. So, a lot of people complaining about the main event. I don't really see why. I think it's a fun fight. Jessica Eye, Cynthia Calvillo. I think this will be a fun one. I know it doesn't have like the drawing power, but you know, we went 10 weeks without MMA. I don't see how anybody could complain about anything. And I'm really excited for a couple of the fights on this one. But let's hear your take on this main event, Nate.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, we're all complaining that we don't have fights, and now we have fights, and the fights aren't good enough. So, I mean, I don't get it sometimes. You know, I mean, yes, I've seen better, more exciting headlining fights. But I mean, I like Evil Eye, and you know, like, I think it's going to be a good fight. I think she's going to do well. I expect her to win. I mean, it's a fight. I mean, like, how do you complain about getting a UFC? Would you rather there not be a fight next weekend? I mean, like, there were. You know, we went a couple of weeks without having them in April, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, you know, why would you complain about it? But, you know, I mean, I guess it's not good enough for some people, you know? I mean, and you know, we are expecting to have some really good cards coming up in July. And, you know, so, I mean, it's not like this is the last UFC of the year, you know? I mean, it's just another weekend, you know?
You got every big name fighter threatening to retire or give up their belt right now. It almost seems like they may have coordinated to do that.
It's crazy. But, you know, like, I really don't blame them. I mean, like, the guys should get paid more money. I mean, you know, I mean, when you see Dana White, and all respect in the world to Dana White, I mean, he built this organization. He deserves to be very wealthy from it. This guy's walking around with like $500-600 million. Like, he doesn't need that much money, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and it's not like he doesn't deserve it either. I mean,
no, he does
for the company, but
he does deserve it. But I mean, like, who deserves it more, the fighter or the promoter? You know, the promoter's always taking more. You know, and well, not so much in boxing. You know, like Bob Arum and Eddie Hearns, like they're not making more than those fighters. But Dana and, you know, the executives of the UFC, they're making like 10-fold more than the fighters.
Yeah, for sure. You know,
it's a very slippery slope.
It is. We go a lot of different directions with this. But yeah, I like that. You know, they're possibly kind of coordinating to try and get something done here instead of, you know, individually jumping and screaming like, I want a money fight, I should be getting paid more. It's like, all right, well, why don't we just kind of like, you know, back alley this a little bit, and we'll, like, you know, get our thoughts together and work together on something here. I don't know that that's going on, but I kind of get that.
I really don't know either,
because it's a little too coincidental that all these big names are, you know, not wanting to fight, especially with everything going on. But anyway, Jessica Eye, Cynthia Calvillo. Give me your thoughts, Jeff.
Dude, I'm excited for this one. I don't know what anybody's complaining about. Both of these girls are really well-rounded, but they each have, you know, highlights in different areas. For example, I feel like Jessica Eye is definitely the better striker, but if it goes to the feet, to the ground, I think Cynthia Calvillo is going to be a little bit more dominant there. And, you know, this could shake up the women's flyweight division a little bit. It's been one of the divisions that's been a little bit more quiet. You know, I don't want the headlines to just be about Masvidal and Conor McGregor not wanting to fight. You know, I'm more focused on the fights themselves, which, you know, like you guys both said, you know, we're getting spoiled here. You know, a lot of other sports are either non-existent or just starting to get back into getting ready to continue their seasons, whereas, you know, the UFC is still going strong. So I love it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. You know who the Yankees are playing next week?
Yeah, nobody. Right.
They're turning Yankee Stadium into a drive-in movie theater. I do think it's a little odd that we have, you know, this main event here. Calvillo coming off that majority draw in her last fight. It's strange to have a fighter go from a draw to a main event, but you know, here we are. And I think there's a lot of really fun fights on this card. The one I'm most excited for is Ray Borg and Merab Dvalishvili. I think Merab is just an absolute machine, and knowing the guys up at Law and hearing the stories of him in the gym, the guy just seems like indestructible, and he's so relentless in there. I love the pace he puts on. And Ray Borg at 135 is, he's a tough task for anybody. Hopefully he makes weight. He faded a little bit in his last fight. So it'll be interesting to see him get in there with a pretty quick turnaround against a guy in Merab who will not wilt. We saw him have trouble with Ricky Simone, who has a very similar style, and Ricky Simone even technically lost to Merab, even though it was that weird situation where Ricky Simone had the guillotine at the end, and then Mark Goddard from the audience was like, he lost. and then somehow Ricky Simone got the win there. But that's a fun fight. And then the co-main event is really fun. Marvin Vettori and Carl Roberson, two big hitters who have some heat. They almost got into it like a hotel lobby or something a couple of weeks ago. But what excites you about this card, Nate?
I mean, like Merab's just an animal, that fight with Borg is going to be super exciting. And, the scrum in the hotel lobby with a Roberson, I'm interested to see what happens with that. I think there was real emotion there. I think there's real animosity. I don't think it's, all for TV. I think, I think these guys are really going to go in there and, let their emotions out. So, when you look at the card overall, you don't have these huge names jumping off at you, but like people who know the sport know these are good fights. And like the matchmakers know what they're doing. Like they're lining these people up, knowing that they're going to be good fights, and that's all I care about. Like last night wasn't the most amazing card on paper, but it was a great show. It was a great show. Those were all good fights last night. I only saw the main card. Obviously, I watched the prelims today, but the main card, nothing to complain about there. Even that decision with Magny and Martin. Even with Magny and Martin, like that was a good fight. They were all good fights. So there's nothing to complain about with these two cards that have been so maligned. Both cards have been a bit maligned over the last month or so, because coming off 249, people think every card's going to be 249 now. It's just unrealistic.
Yeah. People tend to have unrealistic expectations. Not just for MMA, but in life.
General.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of fun fights on this card. I'm excited, and plus it's free. So if you don't think it's good, then don't watch it, or do watch it. And even if it's not good, it didn't cost you anything.
Right,
Jeff, what do you got popping out to you on this card here?
Well, I'm excited for this Merab Valshvili fight, man. Like you said, he's a machine. He puts a pace on in there, and he can keep that pace for 3 rounds, dude. I'm excited, and he's I don't know what it is, man, but these fighters from the country of Georgia, they're just tough dudes, man. They're built out of something else.
Yeah, man, we're seeing a lot of good fighters coming out of there lately. Tough dudes. Nate, I think I cut you off real quick before I deferred over to Jeff.
Oh no, it's fine. It was nothing important. I'm just like out here rambling, so feel free to cut me off whenever you want.
That's all I do. So you're on the right show, my friend.
Yeah, it's perfect for me.
Yeah, a lot of fun fights. UFC Fight Night 172. That's going to be at the Apex as well. I'm going to be watching it. Jeff's going to be watching it. Nate's going to be watching it. Nate, you got anything else you want to get off your chest, and let the people know where they can find your show and where they can contact you on social media and all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at MMA Trufan. Same with Facebook and Instagram. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all the major podcast apps. You can find us at MMATrufan.com. We're going to be releasing George St. Pierre tomorrow, Hoist Gracie in August, Don Fry, Frank Shamrock, Dan Henderson, Henzo Gracie, Anderson Silva every other month, and looking at some other episodes following that, working on now. I don't have those solidified yet, so I can't really talk about them, because I don't want to talk about an episode coming and then not have it locked down yet. So it's kind of bad luck in a way, so to say. But all of those episodes I just mentioned are all pretty much done. They're pretty much just waiting to get finalized. A couple of them aren't completely done, but but we've talked to Henderson and Anderson and Henzo and all those guys, and like it's funny because when I first talked to Henzo, or when I was first talking about Henzo, I talked to George, and George was very forthcoming with Henzo. George called me right up to talk about Henzo, and I was just like, I was just stunned. Like, like George St. Pierre is calling me to talk to me about Henzo, which is kind of crazy. Wow. You know what I mean? Like, he's not, he's usually someone that people have to track down, and he was calling me up, because I talked to someone who knows him, like a mutual friend between him and Henzo. And I said, do you think George might be able to talk? And he's like, I'll ask him, and so I had very, lowered expectations, and George called me right up. But about an hour later, wow. Happy to talk about Henzo. We talked to him for about half hour or so, and I asked him if he'd talk about himself sometime. He said, yeah, and we just went from there. So it's just like, and that's kind of how like a lot of them go is once, because like I never went like directly at George. It was just kind of those things where I'm talking to him, and once they see that you're doing honest work and they see you're out to do good work for them, then most people sign up for that. It's I kind of have a different angle than many other outlets where we're creating tribute work for these people. So a lot of them want to be part of that. Like, who doesn't want someone to pay tribute to them?
Yeah. Whereas a lot of people doing interviews are trying to get you to talk shit about your former teammates. Or
so that's it. That's exactly it. Right. They're trying to get you to stir the pot or something, and they don't want to do that. But I mean, they'll talk about beating the shit out of this guy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. There's something about talking to fighters where you have to understand their psyche a little bit. And a lot of people really miss that mark, and then they don't understand why fighters don't want to talk to them anymore. But that's a whole other story.
We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, we could do a whole separate segment on that. But yeah, Henzo's another one of those guys like a Randleman where people are so quick to want to tell you what a great guy he is because he's a great guy. I've never heard anybody say a bad word about Henzo, and that's really a rare thing in this sport. Because I've been around the sport a long time. I've trained at a lot of different gyms, and people are always talking shit about something or somebody, and I've never heard a bad word about Henzo, and people are always quick to tell you how much they love him. He's just one of those guys that has like an electrifying personality. It makes you want to be around him. But yeah, so Nate, I want to thank you for joining the show and talking MMA with us and giving us some insight and even some stories that don't appear on your podcast, MMA Trufan. I definitely encourage everybody to go and check it out. I loved it. Jeff loved it. If that's not enough for you guys to check it out, then I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the show. I look forward to coming on again, talking again sometime. And it's a great pleasure talking to you guys. I'm a big fan of the show, and it's great to be on with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nate. Appreciate it. If you guys want to get a hold of Jeff, it's at @animal_Wilson on Twitter and Instagram. You guys know how to get a hold of me. It's at MMA on the Rocks everywhere. T-shirts are on sale. I almost forgot. You guys can check the link in the bio of my Instagram, or you can go to Rip Life 1 and check them out there. It's also the pinned tweet on Twitter. I believe I put the link right there. I try to make it easy for you guys. Well, you guys have been asking for the T-shirts, so they're here. So now you can get them. If you find yourself off and over the top and under the influence, then it's the perfect shirt for you. I don't even have one. Oh, I do. Here we go. I'm sure you guys have seen it now, but just happen to have one right here.
Nice.
You guys want to grab yourselves one? Go click the link and have fun and represent the show. We appreciate all the likes and shares and everything else and the feedback. Let us know what you guys are thinking and drinking out there. Until next time, cheers, everybody. Goodbye.